For today's meditation, I want to return again to Analog 69 in the Gospel of Philip. It's a fascinating text, and I find it to be very beautiful. But instead of working on the summation or conclusion of the analog, as we did last time, regarding image and icon being our true identity, I want to go to the first part of it, which is the setup for this analog, and helps us understand the necessity of coming to grips with the idea that our identity is an image and an icon. It's not in our personality, nor in our imagination. So here's the first couple of sentences. Analog 69 of the Gospel of Philip. Ignorance grounded in confusion is the mother of evil. Anyone working out of ignorance is not, was not, nor ever will be a true human being. So there's an assertion here that if you're confused about your identity, you're not a true human being. That's a powerful thought. So if your identity is concealed or unrevealed, it's very difficult to connect with your image or your icon. Now, which comes first or which comes second, that's a work we all do because we all come at the truth of who we are from different perspectives. But the idea that you cannot be a true human being if you're confused about who you are is absolutely certain in this text. So I want to go far afield from this text a little bit, because one of the things that I have often understood and realized and practiced is that the most fruitful time for my thinking and study is after my meditation. It's not during meditation. It's when I am open and able to kind of embrace a larger reality and bring that into the context of my concentration and reflection. That's where the essence of meditation is. It's after you meditate. And so I want to bring to you some of my thinking post-meditation. And that is the idea of identity and how critical identity is in understanding our true nature. And it's also why the forces of this world would like us to be very confused about our identity, because it is the seedbed for their evil doings. And in that, we should be very wary. We should be very wary of those who ingratiate themselves into our personality and find their way into our imagination with images that are corrupted. So I want to go back into another understanding here, and that is the historicity of humankind and its ability, humankind's ability to connect with image and the image of who we are. So how could it be that we would explain the extinction of so many species? Not only human, but also in the animal world. What happens to all these species? Why do they become extinct? So there's a theory of extinction that I think is really profound and important to understand. Extinction occurs because we cannot recognize those who are of a similar species. Now, that can be due to isolation or climate events or geological events, where isolation results in the fact that we no longer can recognize fellow species. So how do cats continue to be cats? They recognize other cats, and they procreate, and they flourish, and they spend their time killing everything that's alive in your backyard. Nevertheless, humankind is exactly the same way. When we recognize one another, that's when we are able to procreate and form bonds and extend the life of our species. But there are times when we cannot recognize one another. So there's a good example of, in our modern time, various political persuasions that can't recognize each other. So it's the classic of a liberal who says, I really don't recognize conservatives. And conservatives say, I really don't recognize these liberals. They are not of my species. We're not going to procreate. one to another. And so there's an extinction looming here because of a failure to recognize or an unwillingness to recognize. So why do these primitive tribes of Europe where humankind sprang, and I think that's the latest theory, is that humankind, humanoids, came from Europe. Well, why were they cannibalizing one another in certain small groups? Because they couldn't recognize those who were around them. They maybe had never left their small geographic area. They were isolated by great forests and enormous chasms of geology. So they couldn't recognize one another. And so because they were unrecognizable to each other, they were confused. And in that confusion, they just killed each other. They were in a state of discombobulation. And that was their only recourse. They could not recognize. They did not have the tools to recognize each other. And so species were extinguished regularly for all sorts of things. And we see that in animal species, species that can't persist because they can't find each other through geological events, climatological events, events of human interventions, whatever the cause. They were not able to procreate because they couldn't find one another. That's the essence of Yeshua's mission here, and why he changed the world so much, because people could recognize who he was. They did not need teaching. They did not need a narrative or a scholastic interpretation or a theological discourse. There was no poetic narrative. He was, who he said he was, and people recognized him. You can follow this example and say, well, why was Yeshua crucified? Well, he was crucified really by the Romans for what is called or what is understood as sedition. But really what underlies this understanding of sedition, it is that Yeshua drew large crowds. Large crowds. He had a huge following. And so what it means is that those followers of Yeshua did not recognize in Pontius Pilate anything of value. Pontius Pilate was of no longer a concern to the followers of Yeshua. And when that was realized, it was realized what a threat Yeshua was to Rome, because it represents an extinction. Rome was about to become extinct because of the recognition of the people of Israel and later around the world to who Yeshua was. So they were no longer recognizing Rome. It was an extinction event, and they knew it. The Sanhedrin knew it. And they teamed up, one to another. And they crucified Yeshua in an attempt to block their own extinction. It's an incredible thought. So where else do we see that in this current society? We see enormously popular figures who are capturing the imagination of the masses, who are being brutally persecuted, and there's an attempt to extinguish them because the powers that be know it represents their extinction because the people no longer recognize them as authoritative. They are not a source of comfort, nor good, nor governance, nor anything else. And so this threat must be extinguished. And it's extinguished to prevent their own extinction. And it's something that's so interesting to think about in terms of the evolution of humankind and our ability to recognize truth and to live as perfect beings, to be a true being. But you can be a true being. You can be turned around if you will recognize your own identity. So in discussing the idea of those who cannot see, who cannot recognize themselves or other people, here is the truth. These people who cannot find the truth in themselves, cannot see the truth in other people, here's what the text says. And yet, if truth is fully revealed, even these can be brought to perfection. So it's a powerful idea. I know I repeat the phrase powerful idea a lot, but it does suit the moment. I'm very entranced by the idea of recognition events and the idea of us being able to recognize truth in one another. What a wonderful thing. So I suggest to you that you, after your meditations or reflections, savor the time to expand your searching, your questing, to go beyond, to take that moment of openness that occurs after your meditation and use that as a way to begin to understand more about your own image and the icon that is you. Amen.